on this computer. All right, our recording is in progress. Hello, everyone. This is Kate Fowler with the South Carolina History Newsletter, and today I am so excited to be interviewing John Sherrer, who is the Director of Preservation at Historic Columbia. And I want to quickly read John's incredibly impressive bio. He is a Columbia native, author, and historian, and has worked at Historic Columbia since 1996. As Director of Preservation, John heads the organization's historic preservation advocacy efforts involving research and programming, management of a 16-property easement portfolio, and historic tax credit fee-for-service projects. John holds degrees from Clemson, BA and MA in English, and the University of South Carolina, MA in Public History, and management certificates from McKissick Museum and the Southeastern Museum Conference's Jekyll Island Management Institute. John has served on the boards of the Columbia Development Corporation, the Columbia Design League, and the South Carolina Federation of Museums. He is a Leadership Columbia Class of 2014 alumnus, and he recently was nominated as a 2023 Ambassador for ExperienceColumbiaSC. John, thank you so much for being here today, and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Kate. I appreciate the invitation.
Absolutely. So to start us off, John, I would just love for our listeners to learn more about you and what you do at Historic Columbia, and also kind of what Historic Columbia encompasses. Because as I've kind of gotten to know your organization over the past couple of months and starting the newsletter, I feel like as soon as I think I know what it is, I read something else that y'all do, which is fabulous. So if you can kind of give an overview of your role and what Historic Columbia encompasses within the city, that would be fabulous.
Sure. Well, as Director of Preservation, I head the institution's preservation and advocacy efforts. I have a hand in everything from policy to presiding over what can and cannot be done to the historic sites under our care from a management perspective as it relates to maintaining those character-defining facets of the buildings. I also have the benefit of being one of a handful of key staff members who perform research, create scholarly materials for public dissemination, make presentations on a host of history and preservation related topics. It's kind of, you name it. Having been here since 1996, you get to dabble in a little bit of everything, and that keeps every day an amazing journey. To tell you a little bit about Historic Columbia, we were founded in 1961 for the express purpose of saving what was then known as the Ainsley Hall House, and that is today the Robert Mills House. That is one of 3 city-owned properties of which we are the contractual steward. And we have 2 other properties under our care that we are the steward of by contract, and that is the Museum of Reconstruction at the Woodrow Wilson Family Home and the Hampton-Preston Mansion Gardens. And those 2 are county-owned properties. And that last site that we take care of is one that we actually own. It's the oldest property left in Columbia, and that is the historic Siebel's House, which dates to 1796 with 2 dependency buildings, one of which is an circa 1830 kitchen, and the other is an 1895 carriage house turned auto garage.
Wow. And what is the proximity of all of these properties? Are they within walking distance of each other, or would one need to drive between them all?
They are within walking distance, and we encourage people to walk. However, for those who may not necessarily wish to do so, they're an easy drive to get to one another. If you're looking at the Hampton-Preston Mansion, directly across the street from that is the Robert Mills House. That's actually where my office is located. A block to the southeast of here is the Museum of Reconstruction at the Woodrow Wilson Family Home. If you go 2 blocks north of where I'm sitting, you end up at the Siebel's House, and then a few blocks to the west, you have the Man Simon site and the Majeska Simpkins site, which is the 3rd City of Columbia owned property that we take care of.
Got it. And have any of these properties been moved to be closer, or they are exactly where they were when they were built?
They are exactly where they started out. They have not moved. They remain in their historic context, I'm very pleased to say.
That's wonderful. And do you, for the Woodrow Wilson House, at the beginning of the newsletter, I shared a bunch of y'all's concerts in the garden events, which is something I would really like to attend someday. Are people surprised that Woodrow Wilson has a historic connection to Columbia, South Carolina?
It depends on who you ask. If you're from Columbia, and you've been here a while, perhaps you do know. Other times there are folks I speak with and they're like, oh yeah, I think I've heard something like that. Really? Oh, that's where his house is. Other folks who are, kind of on top of their game when it comes to historic sites and to some degree presidential history certainly know that we have this property here. And it's interesting because the Woodrow Wilson family home is actually kind of the first example, if you would, of saving a historic property associated with an important person for the benefit of the public. And so that predates historic Columbia by a good generation. And so it's part of that preservation story, that preservation legacy that even predates the organization with which I'm associated.
That's amazing. So y'all offer these incredible house tours all year long, correct?
That is correct. That is correct.
And there's also, I saw on the website, education programs and kind of historic archives. Can you speak to those a little bit as well?
Yeah, we have historic programs, various school programs that allow us to work with students really of all ages, coming to the sites, but also going into the classroom. We have traveling
Right.
trunk programs. All these are geared toward South Carolina educational standards, so they meet those standards. It's very helpful, as you can imagine, having
Yes.
experiential opportunities for the students and for the teachers who benefit from our work. We have programs that reach a variety of different topics, talk about different eras and things of that nature, pre-program emails and content and post-visit materials as well. We've got an incredibly gifted educational staff here. I just was paying a visit to them a little earlier and was just really stoked over some of the hands-on creative things that they've come up with for this next year.
It's fabulous. Making history come alive for the next generation is so important, and I love to hear that. That's awesome. All right, I love asking this question to all of my guests, but can you describe the top 3 most exciting projects you have worked on as the Director of Preservation at Historic Columbia? I know it's going to be hard because you've worked on so many, but if there are 3
Yeah.
particular highlights, we'd love to hear.
Yes. I gave that a lot of thought, and I'm glad you sent out questions in advance because I
Yes.
poured over the questions, and I will say that I have narrowed them down, my answers down, trying to stay within, the rules, and I have 3 for you, but
Yay.
I could give you more if pushed, obviously.
Okay.
So I'd say the first one really for me is the transformation of the Hampton-Preston Mansion Gardens into a site that is a genuine state-of-the-art destination. It rests. This is a 4-acre property, so it's an entire city block. I remember that when I got to Historic Columbia in 1996, the building itself was just kind of in a state of needing some attention, needing some capital improvements, needing some aesthetic work. The collections needed to be kind of tightened up. The grounds were nothing like what we have today, absolutely nothing like what we have. The interpretation of the past was problematic in many ways.
I can imagine.
It lacked content in some areas. And that's not casting aspersions on those who came before. It's just something that happens. History evolves and historic site management evolves over time. I was really, really, really not aware of what this site could become with the appropriate work. I was very excited to kind of delve in and get to know the property physically, get to know the history of the site, so much so that I ended up writing my master's thesis on that property. So it was a comprehensive history of the Hampton-Preston Mansion from 1818 until October of 1998. And yes, there needs to be another chapter written, or at least a couple of
Oh
this.
my gosh.
So
Well,
it was,
can you tell us, like, sorry, briefly, like
yeah,
the brief history? I know it's gonna be hard. Brief history of the mansion and kind of
yeah,
its
no,
historic
absolutely.
significance.
I will do my best. It is it started out in 1818 as a federal style red brick townhouse. As I said, located on a 4-acre tract of land, so an entire city block. There were at least two dependency buildings, two-story flanker buildings in which enslaved persons would have lived upstairs and worked downstairs as well as inside the main house. The property evolved over time from its initial owners, Ainsley and Sarah Hall, owning it really just for about 5 years, to a time period in which the Hampton family, Wade Hampton I and his third wife, Mary Candy Hampton, owned the property. And then ultimately, the Hampton family marries into the Preston family of Virginia, Abingdon, Virginia, and you have later family members who live there really up through and following the Civil War. So during the Reconstruction period, the Preston family no longer owns the house. Thereafter, it was used briefly as a convent. It was used as the home of one of the Reconstruction era governors. It later served for 40 years as two women's colleges from 1890 to 1915. It was the Presbyterian College for Women, and from 1915 until 1930, it was Chicora College for Women. After that, it served a couple of other purposes, not the least of which was a townhouse, or rather, I should say, a tourist home that was established in 1944. And then later it kind of transitioned into a boarding house. And then in 1968, the state of South Carolina purchased the property, and between 1969 and 1970, it was turned into a historic house museum and a historic site in preparation for the Midlands Tricentennial Exposition Center. So part of that 300th anniversary of the state of South Carolina, Columbia's Midlands Exposition Center was essentially the equivalent of Charleston's Charlestown Landing.
Wow. And actually, do we have a picture of that in your presentation of the house itself?
We do. Let me see
I
if
want
I
people to
can
see
get
how
that.
beautiful this
Yeah.
is. And I have not yet been, but I want to go so badly.
So the house is actually located in the upper right-hand corner. And
Yes.
today, you see it as we believe it appeared in 1848 to 1850 in terms of its color treatment. As I did say, it started out as a red brick mansion, and then by the 1830s, it was stuccoed. We know that at that time it had received a very interesting kind of aesthetic treatment. It was fleck painted to look like granite. So imagine granite cut blocks. Or cut granite blocks rather. And then in 1848, between 1848 and 1850, the size of the mansion that you see today was doubled. And you had a 24-room addition grafted to the north elevation of the property. So it doubles the size of the mansion. And at that time, we know that the stucco went to this kind of orangey mustard look that you see today.
Wow. And were you able to tell this just from, paint flecks and
we had a dearth of information, except for a couple of samples here and there that we were able to glean off of the building, off of the historic remnants of the perimeter wall. When the property was rehabilitated in 1969, 1970, a tremendous amount of the historic fabric was either altered or removed. So plaster was removed, and the original stucco for the building was removed. And then the stucco that was applied was a Portland cement-based stucco, which will pretty much stay on the building for the rest of the building's life, because we didn't want to try to remove that and destroy the brick faces and whatnot. So.
Absolutely. And are the gardens, how could you tell what historically accurate gardens would have looked like, or are these kind of interpretations?
Yeah, so the gardens, and this is where I think the property shines just as much, if not more so, than the building itself. And the the garden footprint, as we know it today, is almost an exact interpretation of a sketch that was done in 1941 by a soldier who was stationed at Fort Jackson, and he measured everything out and drew it out. We're not exactly sure why he did it, but he did it. And that was a great, great thing because it showed the building's footprint before the addition was removed in 1969. Obviously, it showed the foundations of other structures, such as a greenhouse that used to be in the northwest corner of the property. And it also showed the footprints of the remaining dormitories, classroom structures, and whatnot that were part of the colleges. It showed all the pathways. It even, talked to some degree about, or noted to some degree, where trees were and bushes and things of that nature.
Wow.
So you couple that document with a tremendous number of black and white photographs and colorized postcards from essentially 1890 all the way up through the late 1920s. And you have a really, really good idea as to what the gardens look like, during the later 19th century. And because of the maturity of many of the plantings and trees and whatnot in those images, we were able to verify what certain plants were, certain trees were, and so forth. The biggest shot in the arm for us at this historic site has been the genuine investment and care, and quite frankly, I think the love of the property through or on the part of a number of individuals, a number of leaders. We have benefited tremendously from support from the Boyd Foundation. This foundation has done a tremendous amount of things in the Columbia area, Columbia Museum of Art, out at the zoo, Boyd Island down on the river, just to name a few things. But at Hampton-Preston, we have seen time and time again the Boyd Foundation step up and invest in this property's future. That includes such things as historic gate restoration, pathway restoration, phased garden planting scheme installations, a revamping of the downstairs or the basement to include classrooms and a suite for special events, the creation of what we like to call a sunken patio on the footprint of that former addition that's no longer standing. So when you're standing on the back stairs of the house today and you look down toward the north, you see the footprint of the addition as it used to be. We know exactly what it looked like because of blueprints and photographs and things, but we also did archaeological excavations there as well. And then
why was it removed or destroyed,
well,
or
that's a
what
good question.
happened?
That's a good question. So in 1969, the mid-19th century addition was removed, probably because it would have cost a great deal of money to rehabilitate the entire building. And I think that the decision was made because the association of the property with Wade Hampton I really was at that time the most important thing. Here's the irony. Wade Hampton I did own the building and the grounds and the property, but it was really the home for his third wife, Mary Canty. It seems that Wade Hampton I really preferred staying out at one of their plantations about 5 miles from here. And so the Hampton-Preston Mansion and its use under Mary Canty Hampton rather, and subsequent generations was really a female sphere there. So that association was somewhat misplaced. Unfortunately, when Wade Hampton, he dies in 1835, that addition isn't built for another, 13 to 15 years. And so I think it was easy for people to say, just take it off. It's not that important. Let's go to the original footprint of the building.
Now, when we're talking about Wade Hampton the First, he is the Civil War general,
He is
correct?
not. No, he
Oh,
is.
is that his father?
No, the Civil War
Oh,
general is Wade Hampton III.
oh my goodness. Okay,
Right.
yeah. Okay,
Yes.
interesting.
Yeah.
But Wade Hampton the First, he kind of began, did he begin their family's incredible agricultural empire, or was that passed down to him from his father?
No, Wade Hampton the First made a tremendous amount of money on cotton production. He amassed an incredible fortune, enslaving people, working in plantations here in South Carolina, and Louisiana. The story that we often say is the Hampton-Preston Mansion was a property that really produced nothing but consumed everything, because it wasn't a working, townhouse, so to speak. It wasn't a working plantation, it wasn't a farm. But then we kind of backtracked and said, actually, the Hampton-Preston Mansion itself was a statement of political standing, of financial achievement, of social standing as well. And so think of it as a place where deals could be made and society could be enjoyed, and the political and social capital, if you would, was something that was certainly, if not produced there, maintained there.
Wow.
So you have this property that, as I mentioned, has benefited from all of these improvements, but the one huge improvement I have not spoken about yet is the creation of the Boyd Horticultural Center. The Boyd Foundation Horticultural Center is located in the northwest corner of the property. This is a multi-million-dollar glass house that has an area for propagation, an area for special events, an area for our horticultural staff, both for administration as well as for storage and for performing programs and things of that nature. And it is a testament, I think, to what a vision can be in people's minds, and then be on paper, and then physically be manifested out of contemporary materials that are assembled in a wonderfully complementary way to a historic property.
Oh, I love to hear that. And now, John, like I could talk about just this one house forever with you, but
No.
we've just covered one of your most exciting
Right,
projects.
right.
Tell me about the
Sure.
others.
Okay, so as I said, Hampton-Preston Mansion Grounds transformed from something that was difficult for me to really envision to something that, quite frankly, is difficult for me to envision every time I see it today, because it's almost like too good to be true. So I encourage people to come see that. Another one of the things that I was really happy about and just really, really loved was establishing the South Carolina Fall Line Consortium in 2002.
Can you
And
say that
this
again?
was,
Sorry, I didn't catch the middle word.
South Carolina Fall Line Consortium. So
Fall line?
Fall Line, yeah. So Columbia is located on the Fall Line, which is
Oh,
the geological part of the state and geographic part of the state where the rivers cease to be navigable from the coast. And as
interesting.
such, this was an area that was a natural transition zone during the 18th and 19th century. It was an area where you would have had some material culture that would be perhaps more reflective of what you'd see in the Low Country, what you'd see in today's Grand Strand, things of that nature. But you'd also have material culture that was really more reflective of what you'd have in the Piedmont. So imagine this kind of liminal space, if you would, that stretches from Cheraw all the way down to Augusta, North Augusta. This is an area of research that Historic Columbia was prompted to get into much more aggressively than it had before. And in co-establishing the Fall Line Consortium in 2002, we assembled representatives from the South Carolina State Museum, McKissick Museum, South Carolina Library, Archives and History, what was then known as the Scarborough Hamer Foundation, Lexington County Museum, and of course the Columbia Museum of Art, to name a few. And when we all got together, we first wanted to know, what artifacts do you have in your collections, your respective collections, that are from the area, from the Columbia, Richland County, Lexington County areas, and let's see what connections we might have, in those. And from that, we were able to expand and look into such things as, oh, okay, well, here we have a certain type of cabinet maker, his work being manifested over these years and so forth. And so we kind of did deep dives into the artisans, the individuals behind everything from furniture and architecture to tools, fashion, textiles, fine art, so forth and so on. So that was really good. And it was good because of a number of things, not the least of which was we were able to generate a tremendous amount of information about our shared past that was applicable not just to our properties, but to other sites throughout Columbia, Richland County, and the environs. We were also able to work with students in the public history field at USC in that program, who ultimately wrote theses on some of the topics that we were interested in researching. We gained a following of individuals who saw what we were doing and entrusted us with donations of new artifacts to the collections.
Wow.
So awesome. You'll see some of those on display in the historic house museums today. And we were able to buy a few things at auction, and that was great as well. So we honed the material culture that you see at the Robert Mills House, to some degree at the Hampton-Preston Mansion, at the Woodrow Wilson Family Home, Museum of Reconstruction, and then to slightly lesser degrees, but nonetheless, some at the Man Simon site. And we brought in collections that weren't necessarily easily displayed in historic period room settings. So we also created focus galleries within the second story of the Robert Mills House. So you can go and take a look at South Carolina, Columbia, Richland County silver. You can look at Stork Landrum pottery, for instance, and things like that. So I won't go too much further into that, but that was a great experience.
Awesome.
And then the other thing that I'd like to say is perhaps among my favorite is working with what the entity now known as Main Street Columbia to establish the Columbia Historic Commercial District. And this was a National Register district established in the mid-2010s. It allowed us to connect with a host of property owners and further their interests, but also bring in much needed energy and ultimately monetary investment for what I would call a renaissance of the 1500, 1600, and 1700 blocks of Main Street, and some of the streets radiating out from that to the east and west. And that's, allowed people to engage in historic preservation work through historic tax credits and Bailey Bill tax abatement incentives. So that's been just a wonderful thing to see, because there are folks who don't necessarily know historic Columbia, don't necessarily come to one of our properties or enjoy our grounds or whatnot, and they're still on Main Street benefiting from a Main Street that is remarkably different from what I left in 1987 when I went off to Clemson.
That's fantastic to know that you and your colleagues and the people that you've helped bring in as well are making such a physical impact on the city. It just is incredible. And like over time, like you said, you've seen it, compound on itself and make such a difference.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. All right, now we're going to transition to our first reader question. This
Okay.
is from Rick in Greer, South Carolina. Are there certain pieces of the history of Columbia that are beyond preservation that maybe only have been written about? If you could wave your preservation magic wand to bring those back to life, what would you focus on? Thank you, Rick from Greer.
So I think that Rick, if Rick is asking, are there certain aspects of the history of Columbia that don't necessarily focus on preservation? I'll answer it one way. If he's asking that are there aspects of Columbia history that maybe only have been written about a little bit, that's kind of a different answer. So I sound like a politician, but I'm going to answer it this way.
Yeah, answer
I
it
would
however you'd like.
say, I would say that the aspects of Columbia history that, for all intents and purposes, are perhaps outside the bounds of historic preservation, at least in the very narrow sense, are those that have been written about in as informed a fashion as possible, given limited resources at the time. And what I mean by that is there's certainly aspects of the past that we just don't know that much information about because it was 150 years ago, it was 200 years ago. There weren't records left, or records that were left have either been lost or destroyed. So that being said, I would say yes. I would like to be able to wave my magic wand and all of a sudden discover photographs before photographs were able to even be taken.
Yes.
Or if I couldn't have that, I'd love to have a diary. I'd love to have some type of incredibly detailed documentation that said, today is Wednesday, such and such, 1836, and I'm sitting in the southwest chamber of my house at such and such, which, by the way, 100 years from now will be this address. It's not the address that you will know because they changed. And here's what the temperature is, and here's what's in my
Right.
garden. And I
Exactly.
got all of this stuff from this person downtown whose store that I frequent. And oh, by the way, his building or her building or whatnot looks like this. And you won't know what it looks like because, well, it burned or it was demolished. So that's kind of a not necessarily a tongue-in-cheek answer, but it is something where when you are met with a dearth of information, you desperately want to be able to have more. That being said, if there are pieces about Columbia's past that are beyond preserving now and really have only been written about, I would say perhaps beyond preservation now, but nonetheless are recalled in photographs. If I'm ever having like a super good day and I need to just kind of bring myself down a little bit, I'll go and take a look at an aerial photograph of maybe a certain area of town where I knew that there were some really, really cool buildings that would be absolutely amazing opportunities for historic preservation. And unfortunately, they were demolished for whatever reason. Maybe it was to build a larger building. Maybe it was for enhanced parking. It's a story that plays out in every city. It's not germane just to Columbia,
Yeah.
but that's one that it's kind of frustrating. I would say that if I personally could go back, I'd like to go back about 70 to 80 years. So after World War II, and be part of the conversations that led to urban renewal changes in parts of downtown Columbia, and
So that you could stick up for the
try
historic properties. Oh my
right.
goodness.
Yeah.
It is heartbreaking when you think it's like that
Yeah,
old Joni Mitchell line, pave paradise, put up a
right.
parking lot. And I think about that too. And next time I'm in Columbia, I can't wait to walk the streets and kind of think on that as well. You know, how many things were destroyed in the name of parking or the name of development, and you know,
Yeah.
these remnants of the past are so special. So
Yeah.
anyway, continue.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, no, not at all. People often say, well, this is missing because of the Civil War, and I'll point out and say, well, no, actually, it's missing not because of what happened in 1865, but what happened in 1965, and that opens up a big
Mm.
discussion.
Well,
Like,
that
oh,
perfectly leads us to our next point, which is I wrote about Sherman's March in my newsletter, and it
yeah,
was so heartbreaking to read about. And um, I actually, John, this weekend, this Saturday, my husband, my stepson, and I, we're gonna go kayaking in Congaree National Park,
nice,
and we're gonna
nice.
make our way through Columbia. And I don't think any of the house tours align with our timing, but I wish
Yeah,
they did. But I do. I'm excited to just drive through Columbia and just maybe even do one of the tours. I think y'all have it on, you could do it on your phone, like self-guided. So
yep,
I'm really excited and I can't wait to tell you. But one of the things that fascinates me about Columbia so much is the fact that, you know, Sherman's march through Columbia, how devastating that was, the
yeah.
enormity of what was lost. Would love to hear your thoughts, you know, how that manifested in Columbia today. I've read portions of Emma LeConte's diary about, you know, she was young. I think she was a teenager, correct?
He's about 14, I believe, if memory serves.
Yeah. And her horrifying account of it. So what you just said was really fascinating. Like not everything was lost in 1865. A lot of it might have been lost in 1965. So
Right.
yeah, can you kind of comment on both sides of that coin?
Sure. Well, I think for people who are from Columbia or from South Carolina, or maybe folks who, you know, relocate to this area, relocate to Columbia, they often hear and think that, well, with the exception of some of these properties, some of the historic properties, everything was burned during the Civil War. And it's all, Sherman's fault, and that's the end of the story.
I've heard
It's
that.
much more complex story than that.
Yeah.
Columbia at the time was approximately 8,200 people in terms of the citizens, the number of people who were here, roughly even between enslaved persons and white citizens.
Wow. So
Um,
it's
that
50-50 white versus,
yeah,
oh wow.
thereabouts. Yeah, but now the number of people had the number had swollen because of refugees coming from other parts of the state, particularly Charleston. And so, thinking of Columbia as the capital city, as a transportation hub, as the political center of the state, also
Let-
as
Let's show the picture of it too. You have a picture
yeah,
of,
yeah, great, yeah.
well,
So
not
let's
that
look
yet.
at, that's not, there we go. So this is
Yeah.
Columbia in about 1860. This is a detail image of a panoramic that was done by Augustus Greinwald, who was a German immigrant who came to Columbia and left a relatively, I would say, impressive stamp on the city's memory, because he captured not just the capital city in this form, but also in a number of other drawings. What you have here is a Columbia that simultaneously was and never was. Looking at this kind of zoomed in aspect of his painting, you have the State House as it was initially intended to be completed. So
Hmm.
this is kind of the near and see idea of the State House with a tower as
I
opposed
thought,
to the
John, I
cupola.
thought I thought that was I was going to say, was that the lunatic asylum?
No, no, no. The state asylum would be far off to the left-hand side of the screen,
Gotcha.
well off of what you see. So essentially, you are looking at the spires of Trinity Church. Those are the twin spires kind of in the center, now Trinity Cathedral. The spire off to the immediate left-hand side of from Trinity is what was then the Robert Mills designed Gothic Revival style St. Peter's Catholic Church. Okay. And then the spire on top of the red tower is actually not a church at all. That's the city hall and market.
Oh,
So
interesting.
the perspective is kind of skewed the way everything is seen here, but with the exception of the spire, the tower rather, on the State House, and the State House being completed, which it was not by that point. This is a pretty accurate representation of the city. This representation is one that is helpful and are trying to explain how architecturally advanced and how accomplished the city of Columbia had become during what essentially is its golden periods from the 1830s through the Civil War. And when I say golden period, I'm not trying to be insensitive. I'm not trying to whitewash history. This is, of course, a city, a state, indeed a region, arguably a nation, in some ways, that was the financial wherewithal was based upon the enslavement of individuals.
Yes.
And this is a generational wealth that ultimately led to the creation of this image of what was able to be conveyed through the artist's pencil. And this is what it looked like in February 17th, 1865. Main Street, or what we call Main Street today, then known as Richardson Street, burns in its entirety from the State House, or I should say the construction site of the second State House. The first State House is actually off the frame. It's not seen here, but that was the wooden State House that burned during the war. So imagine the entire commercial district, an entire kind of government district, if you would, burning to the ground. Approximately 1/3 of the city of Columbia was destroyed. It was destroyed for a variety of factors. There was a tremendous amount of people here. Obviously, Northern forces had taken over the city as Confederate forces retreated. There was a great deal of cotton that had been brought out into the streets with the intent of burning it so it would not fall into Northern hands. There was a great deal of alcohol that was not destroyed. So there was definitely many instances of drunkenness, drunken looting, and then starting fires here and there. In some instances, fires were started by Confederate forces and others, Northern forces, and then probably others, just opportunistic individuals. We can't go back and really know everything. We benefit from some really good scholarly research. Marion Brunson Lucas's 1976 dissertation, Sherman and the Burning of Columbia, is a great source to look at. It's also interesting to see what was being said by people who lived here, such as Emma LeConte, like you mentioned earlier, and then look at how the events were represented after the forces left and Columbia began to kind of pick itself up. Ultimately, this is what Main Street looked like in the steps of the State House. All this being said,
for our readers who are just who are listening on the podcast, I encourage you to watch this section of the whole interview on YouTube as well, because this image is just devastating. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
It looks like it literally looks like it's been bombed, but just with the fire. So
well, cotton, once it starts burning and once the wind picks it up, it was deposited in trees and on top of buildings that had, for the most part, wood shake roofs, and you had a series of fires, and in some instances, they just were not stoppable, despite efforts on people's parts. So this is Main Street or Richardson Street, looking north from the steps of the today's State House. So this is at the intersection of Gervais Street. So you can see just how much damage and destruction occurred along that artery. But again, the entire city was not destroyed, and not even half the city. Approximately one third of the city was either destroyed or damaged. So that there's a legacy of not just who done it, but how much of it was done.
Right.
And that's something that we work to educate people about, because if it's ingrained in your mind that nothing of value from a historic perspective was saved, or very little was saved, then to the uneducated, to the unknowing, a building that is of architectural importance, cultural importance, that may not necessarily look great, can easily be dismissed and say, oh, that's not that old, or that's not that important, or blah blah blah, and that's a kind of a stumbling block for preservationists. The good news is, preservation isn't just buildings that are 100, 200 years old, but buildings, for all intents and purposes, that may have been new when I was young. Because at this point, things that are from the mid-century, 1950s, 1960s, early 70s, are beginning to be considered worthy of preservation, and have become very popular as sites to preserve and not just turn a blind eye to.
Absolutely. All right. So with my weekend agenda in mind, and also for my
Yes.
readers who might not have been to Columbia before, fun question. If somebody were to come to visit Columbia, can you describe a perfect long weekend agenda that would incorporate perhaps historic Columbia offerings, whether it's a home tour, bus tour, etc., and highlight the many facets of the history around the city? Are there certain times of year when historic Columbia events are at their peak? And can you also give us any historic dining and hotel recommendations as well?
Yes,
I know
yes.
it's a big question, but I feel like you're going to give me a great answer. So
All
I'd love
right.
to
Well,
hear your
this
thoughts.
is an elephant of a question, and we're going to eat it in little bites. Okay.
Okay.
Um, so come to Columbia any time of year.
Okay.
There's always something to do. Sometimes there's about 10 different things to do. So when people say, oh, there's nothing to do, like, you clearly don't know what you're talking about. You've got to come and see. Oftentimes you have competing things on your schedule. For Historic Columbia, we do offer programs and events throughout the year. These are sometimes a little less during the summer, but you certainly can take house tours and take garden tours. You can take walking tours during these months, during the nice times of year. We have concerts in the gardens. We do have flower cutting programs, and we
Oh,
have plant
wow.
sales. So we've got the horticultural side of things. We have bird watching now, and birds are here throughout the year. So that's a great thing to do. We have tours of historic downtown neighborhoods. So those are things that are going on throughout the course of the year. If you happen to be in Columbia during September, we encourage you to participate in Jubilee, which is our annual event. It's been going on since the late 1970s, and it's the Festival of African American Heritage and Culture. We have a really brilliant silent auction that is put on each year by our Palladium group, which is our young professionals group that supports Historic Columbia's endeavors. That is held on the grounds of the one of the historic properties, usually Hampton-Preston or the Robert Mills House. Historic Columbia, because these two properties are city and county owned, we do have a number of events and festivals and things of that nature that are put on by a host of entities that bring us such things as the food and wine event during the spring. We have the Rosé Festival.
Ooh.
there's just so many things. Do encourage people to consider when coming to Historic Columbia, look at our website. There may be something that is brand spanking new that I will not necessarily have covered right now. We do roll out things that are new, not just out in the community, but also at the historic sites, in terms of new artifacts, new tours. Sometimes we bundle tours, such as our Journey to Freedom tour, which encompasses the history of the Man Simon site and the Majeska Simpkins site. The Majeska Simpkins site is the former home of South Carolina's human rights activists, kind of the matriarch of human rights activism. We have something going on every week, sometimes multiple things every week. We like to stay busy, and we certainly do that without a doubt. So that's if you're coming to Historic Columbia. And again, to find out more about Historic Columbia, it's www.historiccolumbia.org. Take a look at our calendar. So how soon or how early in the week do you want to come to Columbia? Do you want your weekend to start on Thursday, or is it going to be a Friday morning thing?
For the sake of this question, like starts on Friday morning, let's say.
Okay. I was going to say, if it started on a Thursday night, you could participate in First Thursday, which is an amazing event on Main Street. Let's just say you didn't make it that time, but you know that there's going to be another Thursday at the first of the month, then you can come back later in the year. All right. So Friday, what I would suggest doing is coming into Columbia early, taking a tour of Historic Columbia's, one of Historic Columbia's properties. If you find that a property tour doesn't necessarily meet your schedule, at least come and walk on our grounds. They are free of charge. I think it'll give you a nice kind of respite from either, driving here or perhaps after your flight, get an opportunity to walk around. And then I would suggest perhaps taking advantage of some really interesting and genuinely unique accommodations at Hotel Trundle. Hotel Trundle is located on Taylor Street and Sumter Street. It's an interesting property that it was established, about 8 years ago with the unification of 3 historic buildings into a boutique hotel that is creatively decorated and has inspired proprietors there.
Cool.
Oh, and by the way, this was a historic tax credit project, and it was made possible because of the work that was done years ago, establishing the National Register Historic District.
Yay.
So that's kind of yay. If you happen to enjoy a good cocktail, I would strongly suggest you make your way down to the 1200 block of Main Street, where you can go to a property establishment called Bourbon. This is one of Christian Niemi's endeavors, and it is a really it's a really cool place. I mean, that's kind of a lame way of saying that it is a genuine, I think, just a genuine destination in the 1200 block of Main. And it is one where you can get some really great drinks as well as appetizers and things of that nature. And it's in a historic building, which is really cool. And the historic building happens to be one that was built immediately after the Civil War. So there you go.
Perfect.
After that, after drinks at Bourbon, consider making your way down Gervais Street into the Congaree Vista District. It's just over the Assembly Street intersection. And there's so many places to eat dinner. I'm just going to rattle off a few of them. Motor Supply, it's a great menu. Blue Marlin, 929 Kitchen, the Dragon
I'm writing this all down.
Yeah, all these places. I think I might be planning y'all's
weekend.
Afternoon. Yeah, weekend. Okay, I see how it works. Okay.
Wait, so Motor Supply, Blue Marlin, what was the next one?
Yeah, Motor Supply, Blue Marlin, 929 Kitchen. Boku is really good. Just depends on what you want. There's so many places. Then I would say hold off on dessert and go over to Kaminsky's.
Ooh, okay.
Kaminsky's is a destination for really wonderful desserts. You can get some of the most incredible milkshakes there, just
Ooh,
saying.
love a milkshake.
And then take an opportunity to stroll back to your hotel and along the way, look at some of the public art that's throughout the Vista, including on Lady Street and then some on Main Street. And while you're walking down Main Street, you'll have the opportunity to look at some of the wayside signage that is part of the Columbia SC 63 initiative, highlighting the role of Columbia in the civil rights movement. So there's a little bit of history and art as you make your way back down to your hotel. Saturdays for early risers. Get up and go for an early morning walk or run on the river walk. Enjoy the Congaree River, enjoy the Saluda, get out and see nature right at our doorstep.
Okay.
And then I would suggest you make your way back to Main Street, enjoy breakfast and coffee at the Soda City Market, which is held on Saturday mornings from about 8:30 to early afternoon. And it's not just food, there's entertainment as well as a number of artisans and fresh fruit, fresh vegetables, you name it. It's just a great addition to Columbia's plate on Saturday mornings. And if you didn't get a chance to go see the historic houses on Friday, come and see us on Saturday. Or if there's one you may not have had the chance to see, please consider paying us a visit. Now, it's almost like I wrote this for you, which is really kind of funny because I said, weather permitting, take a canoe trip on the Congaree River or in the Congaree National Park with Palmetto out there.
Yes. I think that's the company we're doing it with. Yeah. Are they the only ones that even do it? Yeah, we booked it for
Mike Mayo's group is just wonderful.
Yep.
And I've
9:30 in the morning on Saturday.
There you go. There you go.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but being in the outdoors with all of the fresh air and all of the activity makes me a little thirsty. So after you finish up, I would suggest seeking out Columbia Craft Brewery, the Beer Keller, Savage Craft, maybe even Weco for post-adventure refreshments. Those are a host of places that are very, very popular downtown or right across the river. Go back, get yourself cleaned up and go for a couple of games of bowling at the Grand, or if you need to just kind of kick back and relax, how about a movie at the Nick? Nickelodeon Theater in the 1600 block of Main Street is just a great asset because of the energy that is brought to really all of Main Street, but particularly that historic area. And it's in a historic building and
Perfect.
a really wonderful Art Deco 1936 facade to it.
Lovely.
After that, consider having dinner at Hendricks. Hendricks is another building that was erected during the Reconstruction period. It does have a rooftop amenity to it, as do a number of Columbia's Main Street properties now. But dinner at Hendricks is great. And then on Sunday, goodness, you're going to wake up early again, right? Because you're excited to be in Columbia and you want to get everything you can get out of your weekend. Go take a walk around the State House. And when you do, you can access, well, you will be able to access, you can't do it right now, but very soon you'll be able to access essentially a digital Bloomberg Connects podcast that Historic Columbia is working on about the State House monuments. We often think about the State House as just the building, but it is the public's really largest gathering space, and there's a tremendous number of monuments that speak to perhaps more about the people who erected them than the people that they're memorializing. And so that's a fascinating history lesson there. And while you're over at the State House, go ahead and walk over to Trinity Church, or Trinity Cathedral rather. Walk
Okay.
around the gravestones and take a look at some of the really beautiful funerary art there and cast iron work. And then make your way over to the University of South Carolina's Horseshoe, just a couple blocks to the south.
Yes, the horseshoe.
And then by that point, you're hungry. So I'm going to go suggest you go to a place that you wouldn't necessarily hear about. It's in the 1700 block of Main Street, and you're going to go to Transmission Arcade. Now, this
Ooh,
is
okay.
where you can play pinball and you can play video games. They have an amazing Sunday brunch.
No
Absolutely.
way.
Yes, they do. I cannot say enough about it. And you can also have a beverage of your choice, as perhaps someone who's watching a soccer game or something else on one of the televisions there. But it's a really neat place. It's right across from the Richland County Judiciary Center, so you can't miss it.
Oh my gosh. John, you were amazing. Thank you so much. I've written down all of that, and readers, I hope you've taken note of that as well, because Columbia is so rich and full of history and culture and excitement. And, I've got a 12-year-old stepson, and here I am writing down, oh, arcade, circle,
Yes.
star. He will love that.
Yep.
So thank you so much for that. And I can't wait to report back on what we're able to do, because we're just going up for Saturday. So I've got to pack in a lot, but hopefully I can
Well, I
pack
was
in at
going to
least some of these.
say, if it wasn't just applicable to your weekend, if it was something just in the general sense, take in a USC women's basketball game, take in
Absolutely.
a USC baseball game, take in a football game, take
Football.
in the University of South Carolina is an amazing resource,
Yes, it is.
academically as well as athletically and culturally. There's so many different
Absolutely.
things. There are plays. We have wonderful theaters here. There's just so much, and I would be remiss if I didn't talk
Your
about
alma
some.
mater.
Yeah.
I love
Well,
that you went to both Clemson and USC. So when you go to
I
the rivalry games, who do you root for?
I will, as a native of Columbia, I will pull for both Carolina and Clemson. I want Carolina to win all of its games until November, when we meet after Thanksgiving. And then my blood is orange. It is absolutely orange. It has to be Clemson.
Yes.
And that's just how it is. But I will pull for Carolina
Love
no
it.
matter what. Otherwise,
All right.
I
Well,
want it to
speaking
be
of games, wait, what'd you say?
I want it to be of national importance. I want people to go, oh, both of these undefeated teams are playing each other. Who are these?
Who are these teams? I know.
Who are these teams? Yeah.
Love it. Well, I'm trying to get to both a USC game and a Clemson game this fall. That's a goal of mine, because I've written about both schools multiple times for the newsletter, and just the excitement and spirit of both schools is infectious. So I've got to make it happen.
If you get a ticket, an extra ticket, let me know. I'll be more than happy to.
Come along. And
Come
speaking
on.
of games, we are going to wrap up this final section of our interview with our Carolina questionnaire for John.
Okay.
We're excited. It's like our own Proust questionnaire, so to speak. And we'll start with our first question, which is, which historical figure from South Carolina would you most like to have dinner with?
Goodness. Okay, so these are, I have two. Is that okay?
That's fine. Go for it.
Okay. Neither of these individuals you will necessarily know, but they are of historical importance. They're important to Columbia, one of whom is Ben Delane. Ben Delane was the husband of Celia Mann of the Mann Simons site that we take care of.
Yes.
He was born in Charleston in 1800, born into slavery. He became a free person of color, and by the age of 28, he owned 2 boats that he navigated from Columbia to the coast and back, carrying cargo. So he became what I would say is a very successful small businessman, and one who overcame many challenges, given the fact that 97% of people who look like him were enslaved at that time.
Wow,
So
that's amazing.
A fascinating individual. And then another person, very different. He's actually a New Jersey transplant by the name of Milo Hoyt Berry, M.H. Berry. He came down to Columbia in 1844, and he stayed here the rest of his life. working as both a cabinet maker and as an undertaker. The joinery skills used in one would benefited the other. As you can imagine.
Interesting. Okay.
And Milo Berry is an individual whose work is seen in a number of public institutions, not the least of which is South Carolina Library. We have some examples now of his work, and it's a really interesting story of a northern transplant who makes their way into Columbia during the antebellum period, essentially, and becomes a smaller business owner, and one who is not exactly, as I say, from here. So he doesn't integrate into the kind of upper crust per se when it comes to like the landed gentry, nor does he associate himself with people of lesser means. He's kind of an interesting individual. He is a northerner who ultimately does become a participant in the enslavement of others for the furtherance of business, and so kind of a conundrum in some ways for people when they look at neat and tidy history. He's not necessarily
not neat and tidy history,
but a very interesting man, and one whose subsequent generations of family members left a large impression on Columbia as well. Yeah,
fantastic. And if you could go back in time to any period in South Carolina history and be immune from any danger, I had to add this clause after my last interview. When would it be and why?
All right. I will qualify this by saying I would want to go back about 200 years. I'd want to go back so I could have a genuine firsthand understanding of the city really in its earliest iteration, with all of the with all of the surroundings, just to know people who built the city, to know people who made day-to-day existence possible. This would allow me to better understand people whose lives were never documented, including people who were enslaved or people who just didn't make the history books at the time. I'd be able to know how some of the buildings were physically constructed. I'd know the paint colors. I'd know, where to go for whatever you needed on Richardson Street, if you're shopping, just to get a total immersion experience. Not worrying about needing any antibiotics, not worrying about mosquitoes, not worrying about whatever.
Yes.
So yeah, that would probably be it. Just transported to a different time.
I love that. What is the most surprising thing you've learned about South Carolina history in your academic research and in your life?
Oh my goodness. I really struggled on this. And I think it's not necessarily applicable to just South Carolina history, but it's the process of history. History is something that's ever evolving. The past cannot be changed. The past is only better known through the application of more resources and more perspectives and the study of those to create the history. And so when you're growing up and you have to take a history class and you think this is exactly the way it was, and then later you learn more to the story, I think that's surprising. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's kind of that's a little bit of a sidestep. It's not necessarily just germane to South Carolina. It's germane.
No, I know what you're saying. I like that. Okay, favorite South Carolina history book or movie?
Sure. I'm gonna say my favorite history book would have to be Walter Edgar's South Carolina History. Dr. Edgar was my thesis director while at USC. I owe him a great deal of thanks and respect, and I think that that chronicle is something that has definitely stood the test of time in the years that it's been out since 1998.
Do you must know that he has a podcast as well, which is fabulous. Did you
I
know that?
may have been on his podcast over the years
Yay.
a couple times. And
Love it.
then my favorite movie shot in South Carolina, I love Forrest Gump. I can't help it. I just think
I
it's so
love it
good.
too.
And
So
the
good.
Beaufort scenes. I've never been to Southeast Asia, but that seems to be pretty close where he's in Beaufort.
Love
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
All right, favorite South Carolina food or dish?
Okay, yeah, I've got three. Sorry.
Go for it.
Frogmore stew,
Okay.
uh, Adloo shrimp and grits, and mustard-based barbecue.
What's Adloo shrimp and grits?
What are Adloo shrimp and grits? Well, all you have to do is make your way down to the Blue Marlin, and you will
Blue
find
Marlin.
out
Okay. Blue Marlin.
that Adloo is Allen Brothers Milling Company, which is directly across the street, and that is where you can get some of the best grits in South Carolina.
Love it.
And well, the shrimp, obviously, South Carolina shrimp. And then
Yes.
mustard-based barbecue. I mean, some people might take me to task on that, but I do love it.
I agree. I much prefer the mustard base versus the red barbecue.
Yeah.
I think the
Yeah.
mustard's delicious. All right. Favorite South Carolina festival or event?
Oh, goodness. All right. So here's the paragraph that I answered. Are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay. Many of my favorite events align with the seasons. And
Okay.
so, as we're on the cusp of football season and the promise of cooler temperatures in the coming months, I'd have to say that event-wise, it's fall.
Okay.
Saturday afternoons in the Palmetto State are my favorite time of year. This time of year brings so many things: football tailgates, Oktoberfest events, races for avid runners, you name it. It's also the season for Columbia events such as the Greek Festival and Historic Columbia's Jubilee Festival, Palladium Silent Auction. And then there's spring, and pretty much anything that has to do with the gardens at Historic Columbia's Hampton-Preston Mansion, Robert Mills sites are winners.
Would you say that's like peak would be May for the
I
gardens?
would say that you're looking really at April through June, early June, because so many people, then take off to go to the beach or the mountains or whatnot.
Sure.
But there's a lot of stuff to do in Columbia during the summer months too.
Yeah, absolutely. And then besides the offerings of Historic Columbia, what is a must-visit place in South Carolina for history buffs? I know we've talked about so many already, but is there another one that means a lot to you that might not necessarily be in Columbia, or maybe it is, that you haven't mentioned yet?
So I have
I know these are
three.
so hard for you.
Stump House Tunnel outside of
Oh my
Walhalla,
gosh,
South
I
Carolina.
can't wait to go there and the blue cheese
Yep,
story, the whole
yep.
thing. Can't wait.
Just a walk around a smaller town in South Carolina. I happen to say Aiken in this respect, but smaller towns in South Carolina all have their own aura about them, and many have historic buildings, and each one of them has, I think, fantastic local stories. So that sounds maybe like a softball pitch on my part, but it's just true. And then who doesn't love a good fort? So Forts Moultrie and Sumter down in Charleston,
Mhm.
gotta go see those.
Yep, love it. All right. Well, thank you for that. Loved your Carolina questionnaire with us. And as we kind of wrap up our interview today, how can people support the great work you and your colleagues are doing at Historic Columbia? I know we've discussed people
Yeah.
coming to do the tours, and I know you'll have a wonderful gift shop, donations. Would just love to hear different ways that people can support your great work.
Yeah. Well, I will say that I didn't get through all of my images. So
Oh my gosh, your
um,
images. We were having
my
so much fun. We
images,
forgot.
I know, I
Yeah.
know. First off, please come visit our sites, take a tour of them, enjoy our gardens, shop at the museum shop, perhaps pick up a copy of Remembering Columbia, which I have on the screen now. That's a chronicle of Columbia from the early 19th century all the way up to the 1970s. Proceeds of that, if purchased in the museum shop, go to Historic Columbia, which is really helpful. If you're a local or if you're often in Columbia, become a member. It makes all the sense in the world. You get free admission to the historic sites. You get reduced admission to historic events and things of that nature. utilize the resources that we've made available on our website. We have so many different resources for history enthusiasts. Attend a special event, like I've already mentioned, whether it's the silent auction or coming up in October, or maybe our annual spring tour with Palladium. Make a donation to our annual fund, or just make a general donation. All of these things are incredibly important for private nonprofit organizations that strive daily to preserve irreplaceable aspects or tangible links to our past. So those are some of the things. And then, as I said, make your way to Columbia. Spend time with us.
How fun that looks. So fun.
Yeah. And then here, of course, are the properties that await you if you come visit us at Historic Columbia.
Fantastic. Well, John, thank you so much again for giving us your time today and taking us through your contributions and incredible path at Historic Columbia and everything that the organization has done to preserve these, like you said, irreplaceable, beautiful gems of history that we can all enjoy. And thank you for taking us through Columbia as a city. And you can just tell how passionate you are as a native, someone who has really made an impact on the city. So on behalf of myself and our readers, thank you so much, John. And I hope all of us will take a long weekend in Columbia someday very soon. Thank you so much.
Come on, we're waiting for you. Thank you.
Absolutely. And I'll pause the recording and we can chat afterwards.
Okay.
But thank you everyone for joining us.